Hello, Miss Shari here. Okay, today we're going to read chapter 5 and 6 of The Looking Glass, Through the Looking Glass by Carrol. Yesterday was very exciting, so let's see what happens. Okay, chapter 5. She caught the shawl and looked about for the owner. Soon, the White Queen came running wildly through the woods with both arms stretched out wide as if she were flying, and Alice went to meet her with the shawl. "I'm very glad I happened to be in the way," Alice said. She helped her put on her shawl again. The White Queen only looked at her and whispered, "Bread and butter, bread and butter." Alice asked the White Queen timidly, "Am I addressing the White Queen?" "Well, yes, if you call that addressing," the Queen said. "It isn't my idea of addressing." "Your Majesty will only tell me the right way to address you. I'll do it the best that I can." "But I don't want it done at all," groaned the poor Queen. "I've been addressing myself for the last 2 hours." "But everything's crooked," thought Alice, "with pins sticking out all over." She added aloud, "May I put your shawl on straight for you?" So I'll let you see again. "I don't know what's the matter with it," the Queen said. "It's not behaving, I guess. I pinned it here, I pinned it there, but there's no pleasing it." "It can't go straight if you pin it all on one side," Alice said as she gently fixed it for her. "And dear me, what a mess your hair is." "The brush got entangled in it," the Queen said with a sigh, "and I lost the comb yesterday." Alice carefully released the brush and fixed her hair nicely. "You look much better now," she said. "But really, you should have a lady's maid." "I'm sure you'll do fine," the Queen said. "2 pennies a week and a jam every other day." Alice couldn't help but laughing. "I don't want you to hire me. I don't care for jam." "It's very good jam," said the Queen. "Well, I don't want any today." You couldn't have it if you did want it," the Queen said. "The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." "It must come sometimes to jam today." "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day. Today isn't any other day, you know." "I don't understand. It's confusing," said Alice. "That's what it is like living backwards," the Queen said kindly. "It always makes one feel a little strange at first." "Living backwards," Alice repeated. "I never heard of such a thing." "But there's one great advantage in it, that one's memory works both ways." "I'm sure mine only works one way," Alice remarked. "I can't remember things before they happen. What do you remember best?" "Oh, things that happened the week after next, for instance," the Queen went on, putting a large bandage on her finger as she spoke. "There's the King's messenger. He's in prison now, being punished, and the trial doesn't even begin till next Wednesday. Of course, the crime will happen last of all," and her voice began to squeak. Alice was just about to say, "That can't be right," when the Queen started to scream so loud that she could not have finished her sentence. "Oh, oh, oh!" shouted the Queen, shaking her hand about it as if she wanted to shake it off. "My finger's bleeding! Oh, oh, oh!" Her screams were so much like the whistle of a steam engine that Alice had to hold both her hands over her ears. "What is the matter?" Alice said, as soon as there was a chance of making herself heard. "Have you pricked your finger?" "I haven't pricked it yet," said the Queen, "but I soon shall. Oh, oh, oh!" "When do you expect it to do it?" Alice asked, feeling like laughing. "When I fasten my shawl again," the poor Queen groaned. "The brooch will come undone. Oh, oh!" As she said the words, the brooch flew open, and the Queen clutched wildly at it and tried to clasp it again. "Be careful," cried Alice. "You're holding it all crooked." And she reached for the brooch, but it was too late. The pin had slipped, and the Queen had pricked her finger. "That is why I'm bleeding, you see," she said to Alice with a smile. "Now you understand the way things happen here." "But why did Why don't you scream now? Alice asked, holding her hands ready to put over her ears again. Why, I've done all the screaming already, said the Queen. What would be the good of having it all over again? By this time, it was starting to get light. The crow must have flown away, I think, said Alice. I'm so glad it's gone. I thought it was the night coming on. I wish I could manage to be glad, the Queen said. Only I never can remember the rule. You must be happy being so glad. Holding. I'm 7.5 exactly. You needn't say exactually, the Queen said. I can't believe it without that. Now, I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101, 5 months and a day. I can't believe that, said I. Can't you? The Queen said. Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes. Alice laughed. There's no use trying, she said. I can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour each day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Oh, there goes the shawl again. The brooch had come undone, and a sudden gust of wind blew the Queen's shawl across a little brook. The Queen spread out her arms again and went flying after it. I've got it, she cried. Now you shall see me pin it on again all by myself. Then I hope your finger is better now, Alice said politely, as she crossed the little brook after the Queen. Oh, much better, cried the Queen, her voice rising to a squeak as she went on. Much better, better, better. The last word ended in a long bleat, so much like a sheep that Alice was startled. She looked up at the Queen, who seemed to have suddenly wrapped herself up in wool. Alice rubbed her eyes and looked again. Was she in a little dark shop? And was that really a sheep with glasses that was sitting on the other side of the counter knitting? What is it you want to buy? The sheep said at last, looking up from her knitting. I don't know yet, Alice said very gently. I would like to look all around first, if I might. You may look in front of you and on both sides if you like, said the sheep. But you can't look all around you unless you've got eyes at the back of your head. Alice did not have eyes in the back of her head, so she kept turning around and around, looking at the shelves as she came to them. The shop was full of curious things, but the oddest part of it all was that whenever Alice looked hard at any shelf to see what was on it, that particular shelf was always empty, but the other shelves around it were quite full. Things sure do change quickly here, she said. She spent a minute or so chasing a large, bright thing that looked sometimes like a doll and sometimes like a workbox and seemed to keep moving to the next highest shelf. Are you a child or a spinning top? The sheep said as she picked up another pair of needles. You'll make me dizzy soon if you go on turning around like that. She was now working with 14 pairs at once, and Alice couldn't help looking at her in great astonishment. How can she knit with so many? Alice thought to herself. She looks like a porcupine. Can you row? The sheep asked, handing her a pair of knitting needles as she spoke. Yes, a little, but not on land and not with needles, Alice was beginning to say, when suddenly the needles turned into oars in her hands, and she found that they were in a little boat gliding along between the banks of a river. You'll be catching a crab soon, said the sheep. A dear little crab, thought Alice. I would like that. Please tell me, where are the crabs? In the water, of course. The sheep picked up several more needles and stuck some in her hair. The boat glided gently through tangled weeds. Alice did her best at rowing as she looked about. She caught sight of some lovely water grass and cried out in delight. Oh, please, there are some scented rushes. You needn't say please to me about, the sheep said without looking up from her knitting. I didn't put them there. I'm not going to take them away. No, but I meant, please, may we pick some? Alice pleaded. If you don't mind stopping the boat for a minute. How am I to stop it? Said the sheep. If you stop rowing, it'll stop itself. Alice stopped rowing and the boat drifted down the stream until it glided gently in among the waving rushes. Alice pushed up her sleeves and plunged her arms into the water to get hold of the rushes, and for a while Alice forgot all about the sheep and the knitting. She bent over the side of the boat with just the ends of her tangled hair dipping into the water, while with bright, eager eyes she caught at one bunch after another of the darling scented rushes. I hope the boat won't tip over, she said to herself. Oh, what a lovely thought. Only I can't quite reach it, she said at last with a sigh. And with flushed cheeks and dripping hair and hands, she scrambled back into her place and began to arrange her newfound treasures. They hadn't gone much farther when one of the oars got stuck in the water and wouldn't come out again. The handle of it was caught under her chin, and it swept Alice straight off her seat and down into the heap of rushes. They hadn't gone much further. The sheep went on with their knitting just as if nothing had happened. That was a nice crab you caught, she remarked as Alice got back into her place, very much relieved to find herself still in the boat. Was it? I didn't see it, said Alice, peeping over the side of the boat into the dark waters. I wish it hadn't let go. I would have liked to see a little crab to take home with me, but the sheep only laughed and went on with their knitting. Are there many crabs here? Asked Alice. Crabs and all sorts of things, said the sheep. Plenty of choices. Only make up your mind. Now, what do you want to buy? To buy? Alice echoed in confusion, for the oars and the boat and the river had vanished, and she was back in the little dark shop. I would like to buy an egg, please, she said timidly. How do you sell them? 5 pence farthing for 1, 2 pence for 2, the sheep replied. Then 2 are cheaper than 1, Alice said, in a surprised tone, taking out her purse. Only you must eat them both if you buy 2, said the sheep. Then I'll have 1, please, said Alice as she put the money down on the counter. After all, she thought, they may not be very tasty. The sheep took the money and put it away in the box. Then she said, I never put things into people's hands. That would never do. You must get it for yourself. And she went off to the other end of the shop and set the egg on a shelf. I wonder why it wouldn't do, thought Alice. She made her way among the tables and chairs, but the shop was very dark toward the end. The egg seems to get further away the more I walk toward it. Let me see. Is this a chair? Why, it's got branches, I declare. How very odd to find trees growing here. And actually, here's a little brook. Well, this is the most curious shop I ever saw. So she went on as everything turned into a tree the moment she came up to it, and she quite expected the egg to do the same. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Humpty Dumpty. See the face? However, the egg only grew larger and larger and more human. When she had come closer to it, she saw it had eyes and a nose and mouth. And when she had come still closer to it, she saw clearly that it was Humpty Dumpty himself. It can't be anybody else, she said to herself. Humpty Dumpty was sitting with his legs crossed on the top of a high, narrow wall. His eyes stared off as if he didn't notice her. She thought it must be a stuffed figure. He's exactly like an egg, she said aloud, standing with her hands ready to catch him, expecting him to fall at any moment. It's very frustrating, Humpty Dumpty said after a long silence, looking away from Alice as he spoke. To be called an egg, very. I said you looked like an egg, sir, Alice explained, and some eggs are very pretty, you know, she added, hoping to return her remark into a compliment. Some people, said Humpty Dumpty, looking away from her, have no more sense than a baby. Alice didn't know what to say to this. It wasn't at all like a real conversation. He never looked at her when he spoke. In fact, his last remark was spoken to the tree. So she stood and softly repeated to herself, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. That last line is much too long, she added out loud, forgetting Humpty Dumpty could hear her. That last line is much too long. Don't stand there chatting to yourself like that, Humpty Dumpty said, looking at her for the first time. Tell me your name and your business. My name is Alice, but that's a silly name, Humpty Dumpty interrupted. What does it mean? Must a name mean something? Alice asked. Of course it must, Humpty Dumpty said with a short laugh. My name means the shape I am. With a name like Alice, you might be any shape. Well, why do you sit out here alone? Said Alice, not wishing to begin an argument. Why? Because there's nobody with me, cried Humpty Dumpty. Did you think I didn't know the answer to that? Ask another. Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground? Alice went on. That wall is very narrow. What easy riddles you ask, Humpty Dumpty growled out. Of course I don't think so. Why, if ever I did fall off, which there's no chance of, but if I did, he pursed his lips to look grand, if I did fall, the king has promised me, and with his very own mouth to send all his horses and all his men, Alice interrupted rather foolishly. You've been listening at doors and behind trees and down chimneys, or you couldn't have known that, Humpty cried. I have not, Alice said gently. It's in a book. Ah, well, they may write it in a book, Humpty Dumpty said, but I'm the one that has spoken to a king. I am. And to show you I'm not snobbish, you may shake hands with me. And he grinned almost from ear to ear as he leaned forward and offered Alice his hand. She watched him nervously as she took it. If he smiled much more, the ends of his mouth might meet behind his head, she thought. And I'm afraid his head would come off. Yes, all the king's horses and all his men, Humpty Dumpty went on. They'd pick me up again in a minute. They would. However, this conversation is going on a little too fast. Let's go back to the last remark. I'm afraid I can't remember it, Alice said very politely. In that case, we start afresh. And it's my turn to choose a subject, so here's a question for you. How old did you say you were? Alice thought to herself for a moment and said, 7 years and 6 months. Wrong, exclaimed Humpty Dumpty. You never said how old you were. I thought you meant how old are you, Alice explained. If I meant that, I'd have said it, said Humpty Dumpty. Alice didn't want to argue, so she said nothing. 7 years and 6 months, Humpty Dumpty repeated, an uncomfortable sort of age. Now, if you'd asked my advice, I'd have said, stop at 7, but it's too late now. I never ask advice about growing, Alice said, but then she decided it was her turn to change the subject. What a beautiful belt you've got on. It's a cravat, child, a scarf, and a beautiful one, as you say. It's a present from the White King and Queen. Is it really? Said Alice. Humpty Dumpty crossed one leg over the other and he gave it to me for an unbirthday present. I beg your pardon, said Alice. What is an unbirthday present? A present given when it isn't your birthday, of course. Alice thought for a moment. I like birthday presents best, she said at last. You don't know what you're talking about, cried Humpty Dumpty. How many days are there in a year? 365, said Alice. And how many birthdays have you? 1. And if you take 1 from 365, what remains? 364, of course. Humpty Dumpty looked at her doubtfully. I'd like to see that one done on paper, he said. Alice couldn't help smiling as she took out her notebook and worked the math for him. Humpty Dumpty took the book and looked at it carefully. That seems to be done right. You're holding it upside down, Alice interrupted. Why, yes, I was, Humpty Dumpty said cheerfully as Alice turned it around for him. I thought it looked a little odd as I was saying that seems to be done right, though I don't have time to study it. And that shows that there are 364 days when you might get unbirthday presents. Certainly, said Alice. And only one for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. I don't know what you mean by glory, said Alice. Humpty Dumpty smiled smugly. Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant, there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. You seem very clever explaining words, sir, said Alice. Would you kindly tell me the meaning of the poem Jabberwocky? Let's hear it, said Humpty Dumpty. I can explain all the poems that were ever invented, and a good many that haven't been invented just yet. This sounded very hopeful, so Alice repeated the first verse. 'Twas Brillig and the slithy tobes, did gyre and gimble in the wabe, all mimsy were the borogoves, and the mum ruth algrabe. That's enough to begin with, Humpty Dumpty interrupted. There are plenty of hard words there. Brillig means 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the time when you begin broiling things for dinner. Well, that'll do very well, said Alice. And slithy? Well, slithy means lithe and slimy. Lithe is the same as active. You see, it's like a two-sided suitcase. There are two meanings packed up into one word. I see it now, Alice remarked thoughtfully. And what are toves? Well, toves are something like badgers. There's something like lizards, and there's something like corkscrews. They must be very curious-looking creatures, said Alice. They are at that, said Humpty Dumpty. Also, they make their nests under sundials. Also, they live on cheese. And what's gyre and to gimble? To gyre is to go round and round like a gyroscope. To gimble is to make holes like a gimlet. And the wabbing is the grassy area around the sundial, I suppose, said Alice. Of course it is. It's called wabbe, you know, because it goes a long way before it and a long way behind it. And a long way beyond it on each side, Alice added. Exactly so. Well then, mimsy is flimsy and miserable. There's another two-sided word for you. And borough is a thin, shabby-looking bird with its feathers sticking out all around, something like a live moth. And then, Mome Roth, said Alice. I'm afraid I'm giving you a great deal of trouble. Well, a Roth is a sort of green pig, but Mame, I'm not certain about. I think it's short for from home, meaning that they lost their way, you know. And what does algrabe mean? Well, algrabe is something between bellowing and whistling with a kind of sneeze in the middle. However, you'll hear it done, maybe down in the woods yonder, and when you've once heard it, you'll be quite content. Who's been repeating all that stuff to you? That hard stuff. I read it in a book, said Alice, but I had some poetry repeated to me much easier than that by Tweedledee, I think it was. As to poetry, you know, said Humpty Dumpty, stretching out one of his great hands, I can repeat poetry as well as other folks, as if it comes to that. Oh, it doesn't need to come to that, said Alice. But Humpty Dumpty went on to tell Alice a very long poem which she did not understand. It did, however, start to get interesting. Alice thought, as Humpty Dumpty said. And when I found the door was locked, I pulled and pushed and kicked and knocked. And when I found the door was shut, I tried to turn the handle, but... Then there was a long pause. Is that all? Alice timidly asked. That's all. Goodbye. Well, this was rather sudden, but Alice felt it wasn't right to say, so she got up and held out her hand. Goodbye, until we meet again, she said as cheerfully as she could. I wouldn't know you if we did meet again, Humpty Dumpty replied, giving her one of his fingers to shake. You look just like other people. Most people try to remember the face, Alice suggested. That's just what I'm talking about, said Humpty Dumpty. Your face is the same as everyone else's. The two eyes, the nose, the mouth, the middle, the mouth under. It's always the same. Now, if you had two eyes on the side of your nose, for instance, or the mouth at the top, that would be some help. It wouldn't look nice, Alice objected. But Humpty Dumpty only shut his eyes and said, wait till you've tried. Alice waited a minute to see if he would speak again, but he never opened his eyes. Goodbye, she said once more and quietly walked away. She couldn't help saying to herself, of all the unsatisfactory, she repeated this out loud, for it was nice to say such a long word, unsatisfactory, of all the unsatisfactory people I ever met. She never finished the sentence, for at this moment, a heavy crash shook the forest from end to end. End of chapter 6. Thank you. Stay tuned for next week. Next time. Next time, it'll be chapter 7 and 8. All right, bye for now.